Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Rand from the Evanston Public Library. It may say Heather Norborg on your screen, but I'm using Heather's Zoom account, so that's why it has her name. But my name's Julie. I'm the ecology librarian at Evanston. So welcome, everybody. I think we'll have a great talk tonight about how we can help birds. I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists, I guess. We have Bob Dolgan, who made a film about the plovers and is an active bird watcher. He'll be starting our program. And I'd also like to introduce Tamima Itani, and she's a very active birder and helped organize the volunteer efforts to protect and monitor the plovers. And Annette Prince is from Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. She'll be talking about things you can do to make your house more bird friendly. And Allison Sloan from, is it Natural Evanston, is that right?
Natural Habitat Evanston. It's
Thank you.
Of Citizens Greener Evanston.
Allison's gonna talk about ways that you can create like a bird friendly backyard and things like that. So without further ado, I'll ask Allison and Annette and Tamima to stop their videos, and I'm also going to drop off the video. And if all the participants can please mute themselves, we will be recording. Bob, are you ready?
I'm ready.
And also, if anyone has any questions, please post them in chat. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and I'll be moderating that. Okay.
Great. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks so much, Julie, for inviting me to present tonight. So I saw in the billing of this this event that there was a mention of this really awful statistic of 3 billion birds lost since 1970. That's based on a report that was issued by American Bird Conservancy and others almost a year ago now. And it's a really unsettling figure and a sad one. And I'm glad to talk about why it's come to that. And I'm sure our other panelists could speak to that as well. But I'm going to highlight, actually, I'm going to accentuate the positives here as much as possible for my portion, not to paint an overly rosy picture, but you know, I guess maybe it's just the mood I'm in today. But we're going to highlight a real success story, and that's the film that that I made about the piping plovers that nested at Montrose Beach last year, and now 2 years counting this year. But I'm going to show a couple of clips from the film. Hopefully that sparks some thoughts and dialogue and gives you a sense of the plovers if you're not familiar with them. But first of all, you know, the Chicagoland area is an amazing area for birds, and it's at an intersection of some really unique ecosystems. We have about 500,000 acres of green space throughout the area. It's kind of from southeast Wisconsin down through northeast Illinois, over to northwest Indiana and southwest Michigan, and that's a really high number for a region of our size, and a very, you know, what is thought of as a very urban and industrialized region. So so we have some amazing green space, and that also means that and we certainly have more work to do to preserve more, and there's a lot more we can talk about, but we have some amazing green space, and we also have a huge asset right here in Lake Michigan. I live in the Uptown neighborhood, so I'm only about a 10-minute walk from the lake. And Lake Michigan, because of its shape, acts as a sort of funnel for bird migration and bird movements. And birds coming up from the south sort of hit the lake, maybe a place like Indiana Dunes, and then either need to go west or east. And if they go west, they end up over along the shoreline here. And so my favorite place to bird, and not far from where the plovers nested, is Montrose Point here in the city and in the Uptown neighborhood, in fact. And Montrose Point also has the benefit of jutting out into the lake. So it's a natural migratory stopover for birds. So, you know, hundreds of birders every spring get out to Montrose in a normal spring to look for birds. And it's really known for, I would say, and I'd be curious, maybe Tamima, Annette, maybe you have other thoughts on this, but I'd be curious to hear what you think. But I would say really known for its warblers, which are these small migratory songbirds that are just these beautiful species that mostly turn up here in passing a couple of times a year, and you can at Montrose see, you know, a great diversity of warbler species in the spring in particular. And so the other amazing thing at Montrose are the amount of shorebirds that utilize the habitat increasingly out on the beach. And these are species such as sandpipers, plovers. There are some certain wading species like herons. I'm probably forgetting a few others, but so anyway, people were out birding at Montrose last spring, pre-pandemic times, no restrictions. Everybody's out at Montrose and enjoying the amazing diversity of bird life. And so it was pretty surprising, I think, when a pair of piping plovers, which are one of the more endangered species in the Great Lakes region, there are only about 70 pairs left, decided to start exhibiting nesting behavior over at Montrose Beach. You know, at that time of year, Montrose Beach is pretty empty. It's early spring, like say May. And it can be often quite cold out there, and there aren't that many people on the beach. But anybody who knows Montrose Beach and Chicago City beaches know that in the summer, they become much more crowded. And so how these plovers were going to possibly nest over on that beach was confounding, I would say. I mean, it was just like, I don't really understand how this can be possible. So there were an amazing group of volunteers who started to stand guard over these nest scrapes in the sand. And I within the first week, I think it was, was signed up to be one of the monitors. And by that point, there was already sort of a roped off area for them. I also started filming. It just happened to come at a time in my life when I had the time to focus on that and really just tell what, start to tell what I thought was an amazing story of just these plovers showing up to nest right in the city, which hadn't happened since 1955. So I continued to film and eventually put together a 23-minute documentary, which I'll be showing a couple of clips of here tonight. So the first clip, this is from kind of early last summer, and it's one of my favorite parts of the story and of the film. And it's when a storm is sort of beginning to gather on Lake Michigan and threatening the first nest, which has 4 eggs in it. It was very uncertain as to what the fate of the plovers and the eggs would be at that point. And so I'm going to share my screen quickly and play this clip, which is about maybe a minute and a half or so long. So here we go.
That the plovers chose was, from a people standpoint, a crazy location.
Monty had actually done his goose stepping and was approaching Rose, and so we knew that mating was going to be very, very shortly.
I was very concerned with just how busy this beach is, and when I learned that they had nested in an area prone to flooding, I was very worried.
On June 12th, I came. Rose was on the nest. The 4 eggs had been laid, and everything looked so peaceful. It looked like we were going to have a successful nesting experience. as we started looking at the forecast for the rest of the day, it was high winds, torrential rains, but even more concerning, a strong storm surge from the lake. There was already a lot of water on the beach, and there was a good chance that the water would rise to cover the nest.
So it's been raining on and off for a couple of hours now, and we're worried about the water coming closer to Monty and Rose's nest. One of the fears is that they'll abandon the nest if it goes underwater, and it's likely to rain even more this afternoon, so we're really not sure what will happen.
I looked and saw the waves building on Lake Michigan. We knew we were in trouble. And they were calling for 35 to 40 mile an hour north winds.
Right, so that's the first clip, kind of from the first act of Monty and Rose, the short documentary. You know, I don't want to give away too much. We're not showing the whole film, but if people want to see the whole film, you can go to montyandrose.net, where you can stream it or you can order a DVD. The story went on from there, and Monty and Rose proved to be a resilient duo, and ultimately they scraped a new nest site that was in a much drier part of the beach, higher up on the beach, and they ultimately ended up laying another clutch of eggs, and two young plovers fledged out on the beach. So not to give it all away, and there was a lot of drama in between, I would say, including a planned music festival that propelled the plovers to the headlines. So I'm going to show another clip, because I think this was one of the really amazing themes going back to 2019, continues to be a theme. And this has to do with the outpouring of support for the birds and the mighty volunteer effort that was marshaled to protect them. And so I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to just kind of fast forward a little bit in the film.
There he is.
What's the
It's so exciting. Can you see them?
People were really rooting for these plovers to succeed. They wanted to make it. So we started seeing a lot of volunteers email and sign up.
And at that point, we really didn't know what the response would be or how many volunteers we would need. We just knew that we wanted to try to cover as much of the daylight hours as possible.
People were always stopping by. Most of them were really excited that this was happening here. So I think it speaks well for the efforts of the Park District to create natural areas and to maintain them in a way that makes people understand nature a little better.
And then there was a call out for a need for volunteers. And it just really piqued my interest. I didn't know what to expect at first because I'm not a birder per se. So I was a little intimidated by some of the knowledge that some of the other volunteers had about birds. The reactions were just pure joy. I'm really excited to see the birds nesting there.
We wanted to make sure that some of the volunteers could focus on the people, educate them about the plovers, show them the plovers in their binoculars or their scopes. I think these birds have been a tremendous ambassadors to birding, to birds, to having wildlife within your city. It's a great story of engaging people and bringing them on board.
All right, so that'll give you a sense of the amazing volunteer effort that took place and just the spontaneous outpouring of interest and support that, at least for me, was unlike anything I'd ever observed. in the, in the community in general, and in birding in particular. It was just phenomenal. And obviously this year was very different with the beach being closed, but I'm sure we'll touch on that further. So, so yeah, that might be the perfect transition possibly to Tamima, who you saw there featured in the film very prominently. And so I think she's up next on the agenda.
Thanks, Bob. And Tamima, I'll ask you to take over. And Bob, if you can mute yourself and turn off your video, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamima Itani. I'm with the Illinois Ornithological Society, and I've been involved with the piping plovers for 2 years now. Last year in May, I was at Montrose Beach, and on various occasions, I noticed piping plovers. The ones that I actually named Monty and Rose because it was very difficult to name them by their band letters, and people would confuse the band letters every time I sent an email about them. So on the spur of a moment, as I was sending an email just after Montrose, I named them Monty and Rose, and the name stuck. So on June 3rd, I noticed that Monty had started courtship display, and then on June 4th, I went back to Montrose and I saw Monty scraping a nest. And you saw in Bob's film how shallow the nest is, and it is just a cup in the sand. The location that Monty and Rose chose on Montrose Beach was just about 20 feet from a very busy walkway. And people at Montrose don't stick to the walkway. They basically get off the walkway and then they walk to the lakeshore. And it became obvious immediately that the nest would be at risk of being stepped over by people if it wasn't protected. So I was there on June 4th, and my instinct was I cannot leave until we have some means of protecting this nest. So I stayed there that first day myself. I called around to see who else could come. And 2 other people came that day. So between the 3 of us, we covered the first day and made sure that no one was stepping on the nest. We also called the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We called the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and the Illinois Ornithological Society, the Chicago Ornithological Society, and the Chicago Audubon Society starting working social media to call for volunteers. And we were able to have volunteers set up for the first 2 days to watch over the nest. Just to give you an idea, the nest was right in the middle of where the Ultimate Frisbee League was supposed to play that night. And so we actually had to beg and plead with them not to set up their field where the nest was. They were very nice about it. They were very understanding, very nice about it. They asked us, just tell us what we should avoid and we'll avoid it. So we actually dragged all the trash cans and garbage cans that were on the beach, and we created a perimeter to protect the nest. And they set up their Ultimate Frisbee fields away from the nest that first night. So that was the women's Frisbee team the first night. The next night, we did the same thing with the men's Ultimate Frisbee team. And then I think it was the 3rd day that the Illinois Department of Natural Resources came and created a formal perimeter with ropes. And that helped tremendously because people had the visual of ropes with flags that they could see, and they were not supposed to walk through that. Now, you think that having a perimeter with ropes would tell people, okay, please do not walk through that. It was really interesting. People would just, some people would actually just literally step over the rope and walk through the perimeter. So our job as monitors were to actually try to prevent that and tell people that they weren't supposed to walk through that and why. The harder part was when people had dogs off leash, because it was often, we often could not intervene fast enough to not allow the dog to go through the enclosed area. So, we just, sometimes we just have to watch and keep our fingers crossed while the dog went through the area and just hope that nothing happened. So the first egg was laid, the second one, the third one. After the third egg was laid, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources put a wire exclosure. It's called an exclosure because it's supposed to keep predators out. So it excludes predators. And that helped because then at that point, even, events like dogs off leash cannot harm the nest and eggs. And that gave us a lot of relief. So the first location was very, very difficult. It was, as I mentioned, 20 feet off of a very busy walkway. It failed because of a significant storm surge on June 13 of last year. The nest went under a foot of water. And so, the eggs were salvaged, but they were incubated, but they did not hatch. And the plovers re-nested. They re-nested in a location that was so much better, on a higher part of the beach, much drier, a part of the beach that did not get water. And from a monitoring standpoint, it was much easier to monitor. So the monitoring process, so we put out a call for volunteers. And last year, we monitored the nest from sunrise to sunset. So from about 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day for 13 weeks. We had 190 volunteers, and that was over 1,500 hours of volunteering and of watching the nest and the chicks. Now, people would think that those were all birders. They really weren't. A lot of people were kind of peripherally associated with birding. People were from the Lincoln Park Zoo or from the Sierra Club. They were birders. Some of them were birders, of course. Anyway, they were kind of peripherally associated with birder or the environment, etc. And very, very dedicated to the well-being of the piping plovers. We had intense challenges. I think, standing there in the heat, standing there in the rain, having a lot of people who just did not want to hear that they couldn't cross the area, having off-leash dogs, which I mentioned. Off-leash dogs were our biggest challenge. But we also had a lot of positive experiences explaining to visitors coming through why we were there. They were very curious about what we were doing. So they would ask us what we were doing. They were very curious about the plovers. And anyone, well, last year we were able to share our scopes, and anyone who would look and see the plovers in the scope would fall in love with them immediately. So it was a great way to teach people about birds and conservation and what you need to do to help birds and their habitat and promote their survival. The piping plover family last year became great ambassadors for species survival. And so out of the 4 eggs, 3 hatched and 2 survived last year. Fast forward to this year, Monty and Rose came back. It was really interesting. They winter in different parts of the country. Rose winters in Florida. Monty is believed to winter in the Texas area or even in northern Mexico, but they came back to Montrose within a day of each other. And that was in May. None of us had access to Montrose because of the lockdown, and we weren't allowed to monitor. Eventually, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife set up the exclosure as they did last year, but eventually we were allowed to monitor, and it was a very different experience this year. There was the whole concern about social distancing. We weren't allowed to share scopes, of course. It was also a shorter experience because fortunately the first nest succeeded. They had 4 eggs, all 4 hatched. Unfortunately, 1 chick did not survive, but the other 3 did, and they fledged. Because of COVID, we asked that the volunteers be volunteers from last year so that we wouldn't have to train any new volunteers. We didn't have the ability to train. So we wanted people who had already been trained. And we had a very successful monitoring and volunteer experience this year. And we just wrapped it up this past Sunday. The piping plover family is still at Montrose right now, and they'll start on their southern journey soon. You know, the volunteers are extremely committed to the piping plovers. They love them. They're already saying, hey, sign me up for next year. And, you know, they just want to make sure that the species survives and thrives. But I'm very grateful to all these volunteers who put so many hours. And you know, we had days in the 90s, there's no shade. It gets very hot. The day that the chicks hatched was one of the hottest days, and everybody was there for hours, but it was really cool. Julie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Tamima. So we're now going to welcome, here, I'll put myself up. We're now going to welcome Annette Prince from the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, and she's going to talk about the things that she does to protect birds and also things that you can do to make your house more bird friendly.
Let's see if this works.
I can see you and I can hear you.
Right. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And you can hear me? All set?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. All right. Julie is going to be sharing with participants the Bird Safe Homes brochure that was put out by Audubon, Pennsylvania, and their Bird Window Collision Working Group has pulled together a lot of great information. So at the end of this presentation, she'll offer that to people, and I wanted to be able to acknowledge the fact that they've put this great work together, and many of the slides that I've incorporated into this presentation and my overview today are coming from Bird Window Collision presentation that they've shared with us as well. So I'm going to be talking about the collision hazards and the work that Chicago Bird Collision Monitors has been doing over the last 18 years, working to document, educate, and advocate for migratory bird protection. Chicago is an important location for migratory birds. We are in the path of millions of birds that every spring are traveling north to their breeding grounds, and every fall are flying south to their wintering homes. And millions of birds fly through this area, hundreds of different species. And these birds have been following these paths for tens of thousands of years, long before there were people here, long before there were buildings and lights. And only in the last 100 years or so have we filled these areas with the urban hazards of lighting and glass. It's a hard thing for them to adapt to, and it's a route that they are conditioned to use for the benefits of being able to follow these pathways with rivers and resources that they need on their travels north and south. The majority of migratory birds travel at night, and they are using navigations of stars and the moon and magnetic fields. But what disrupts some of these travels and orientations that they have to both light and celestial bodies are the highly lit urban areas that we have now put along their paths. We have urban lighting that comes as part of display lighting. We have buildings like a building such as the Ryan Athletic Center there at Northwestern that sits right out along the lakefront, which is a path that the birds follow. And the light that goes out from these buildings pulls birds off their pathway, disorients them, and draws them down toward the urban areas where there are additional dangers waiting for them. Once birds have been drawn down into the urban areas, they are facing what is their number one hazard in regard to an urban setting, and that is glass. Glass can be dangerous for birds for a couple reasons. When glass is reflective, it is showing an image of the sky or trees, or absolutely an absence of anything solid that they think they would run into. And it looks as though with this particular building that you could just fly right through the top of that building onto some more clouds. So the reflections can deceive them to fly towards the solid surface of glass. Or if glass looks invisible and transparent, as the lower part of this building is showing, it looks as though you could fly either right in or right through an area where the glass is clear. People don't understand reflections and can be fooled by reflections or transparent glass, as you see a lot of funniest home videos where people walk into glass walls and doorways. Birds don't have the reference points that we as humans eventually learn to know that there's a surface there because of our experiences living in an urban environment. And these birds are coming through and with no ability to understand that these are very dangerous areas for them to move through. Birds often see plants inside of lobbies and people's homes. Many of them die trying to fly into a habitat. Plants, fountains, very inviting lit environments on the inside of a home or a downtown building. The Chicago Bird Collision Monitors started in 2003. Working to help support the Lights Out Chicago program, which was a voluntary effort started in the late 1990s, asking Chicago buildings after 11 p.m., which is when the majority of birds would be flying through the city from after midnight through sunrise is when birds were passing over the city. And the goal was to have as dark a skyline as possible, as dark a city especially along any lakefront areas. So any top lighting like the antenna lights, logos, signs, bright building lights are asked starting in the late 90s to extinguish those after 11 p.m. so that we have a darker skyline. Some buildings were doing it. We worked a lot with buildings that weren't participating yet. It is all voluntary. We also work with buildings at a ground level to say that a very brightly lit lobby can also be something when a bird has finished flying in the evening and is coming down. If they happen to be over Chicago, they're either attracted by the lighting or they come down and are pulled towards some of the brightly lit ground level lobbies and lit areas, which again brings them in closer proximity to glass, which is where we want them to be able to, something we want them to avoid. So what our teams do, we have more than 100 volunteers that go downtown Chicago during the spring and fall migrations. They're going downtown while it's still dark out to be there for the first arriving birds that may be landing in dangerous areas. The volunteers are picking up hundreds of birds. In just the 1 square mile that we monitor, we pick up more than 5,000 to 6,000 birds are picked up every year at the base of buildings for birds that have hit windows, either at upper levels or sometimes it's just down on ground level when they strike a lobby or any other glass structure. We have bus structures that are glass now. There are fencing areas that are glass. There's just a whole addition of dangerous zones that these birds will come down into. These volunteers are downtown in the early morning hours, gathering the birds that have died to both document and record the types of birds that come through. We found over 200 different kinds of birds. These are not regular residents downtown. We typically don't find pigeons and sparrows. Birds that live year long in Chicago are familiar with buildings, and they've kind of learned how to bump into the surface of glass and not fly towards it directly. But these birds are coming from rainforests and tropical areas in the south and going up to northern forests, and they have very little of their lifespan that is spent in proximity to buildings. So it's very easy for them to become both confused and injured. The dead birds are all taken to the Field Museum for, again, research, raising awareness, documentation, so that we can actually make sure people understand that this problem is happening. It's a problem that could go largely unseen, because by the time most people get downtown, hours later after sunrise, scavengers have grabbed these birds, sweepers have swept them up. There's no evidence that thousands and thousands of birds are dying at the edge of buildings downtown. So our volunteers are down there to bear witness to what's going on, to educate the people that we talk to help out people downtown who have been aware of these birds being harmed and really not knowing what to do when they find a bird like this. So our volunteers can recover these birds. The ones that, and some days we can find as many, on biggest days we found as many as 300 birds downtown. 300, we once had 300 live and another 300 dead. We just can find so many birds of, as I said, of 200 different species. The dead birds are sent to the Field Museum. They've been used for some very important studies, longitudinal studies, because studies have gone on at the McCormick Place building for 30 years, and our group has almost 20 years worth of collected birds. And the type of birds have been able to be studied as far as migration patterns. More research can be done with these birds in hand to find out what's happening and what's happening to populations and what's happening to the birds and their physiology as we have climate change going on around us. The injured birds are bagged in little paper bags and sent to the Willowbrook Wildlife Center in Glen Ellen, where they are assessed. A great majority of them, if gotten safe from being at the foot of a building where they could get stepped on, run over, or attacked by a predator, can go through a recovery process, which is essentially the majority of these birds are suffering various degrees of head trauma. Some of them do, like this bird here has a fracture that he's required a wing wrap. Some of the birds can be released even the same day so that they can go off and continue their migration safely in the beginning in the forest preserves in DuPage, as opposed to being released on a lakefront area where they're going to encounter more lights and buildings. Other birds stay for treatment, and hopefully we have given many of these birds a second chance to continue on their migration. Chicago Bird Collision Monitors is working to have the city of Chicago adopt bird-friendly building design requirements within their building codes. We've testified in front of City Hall. We've gotten the support of many city aldermen to help us get these policies instituted. We've helped them write the policies of the kind of designs we'd like to see buildings going forward, the kind of glass and features that will minimize risks for birds. It is currently, these requirements are being incorporated into the Chicago Sustainability Plan, such that any new building that goes up in Chicago that has a sustainability review is going to be required to meet a certain number of bird-friendly design features in certain zones, particularly the lakefront zones, the downtown zones, any building area that's near a natural area along the river corridors. And we feel this is where the majority of migratory birds are going to encounter buildings. We know that birds move everywhere, but it is a start to get these critical areas to advance bird-friendly design. This would affect all buildings going forward once the sustainability standards have been put in place. such that a new building would be a design. The building on the left is the Aqua Tower in Chicago, which was designed by Studio Gang with the intent of bird-friendly design. This is a building with a lot of glass in it. It's a building that has windows. It's a residential building with, spectacular views of the lakefront and a lot of glass, but instead of being an invisible glass block or a reflective glass wall, they have added these concrete balconies, which give the building presence. They give birds visual noise and something to see. So all these terraces that go up the side of the building are giving the birds something to see and avoid and to fly around as opposed to fly towards. And that's the sort of design features we want architects and planners to be looking into. We're in contact with the Obama Center, regardless of where that building is placed and wherever the center ends up being built in Chicago. We want to make sure that it incorporates these bird-friendly design features, and the architects and planners for the Obama Center are meeting with people to make sure they incorporate as much bird-friendly design as possible. And we know that this is what's going to, hopefully, with the sustainability and ultimately a building zoning ordinance for the city, will hopefully protect buildings going forward. But there is also the issue of already existing buildings. And if all we do is fix new buildings, we know that the thousands of birds that are dying are still going to die at the buildings that still exist. And downtown Chicago, it has plenty of them. Northwestern University in Evanston has historically had high numbers of bird strikes on its Evanston campus because it is positioned right there on the lakefront in the middle of heavy migratory activity. A monitoring program there that we coordinate is identifying critical areas. The university cannot retrofit all of its buildings at once, and there is a high price to pay for retrofits. You can almost pay as much as a replacement cost of a building to either replace its glass or add the elements that will make it safer for birds. So it is a big ask to say that all buildings that currently exist have to retrofit for bird-friendly design. But if we can identify the critical areas where birds are impacted the most, the university at Northwestern has made a commitment to a process of making their buildings safer for birds and being able to try to retrofit, particularly if they cannot do the entire building, if they can at least identify an area where it will make the biggest difference for birds. This is the Kellogg Global Hub, a brand new building at Northwestern, which is glass from top to bottom and sits right on the lakefront and reflects trees, as well as having many transparent areas of glass. It's a highly hazardous building for birds for its location and its design. And we have identified through a monitoring project that goes on just at Northwestern that the eastern side of the building, the side that faces the lakefront, has proven to be, with what could be expected reason, the most dangerous areas for bird strikes. It's where birds are coming off the lakefront. It's by the natural areas that they like to use, and it's one of the first things they're going to encounter. So the Northwestern has added window film, feather-friendly window film. If you can see the dots, the very tiny, what are pretty inconspicuous dot patterning on the photo on the right is showing you how an added window film can give birds the visual cues they need to avoid coming towards the surface, because they see something there as opposed to an invisible area. So, and we have found through monitoring and documentation that adding these features, these window films, to several buildings on campus have significantly decreased the bird strikes. And so we're able to show to Northwestern that this is worthwhile, that it is going to produce results. And really, in the end, aesthetically, people often protest having to retrofit a building, but we're also trying to show them that it really hasn't affected the aesthetic of the building that they're hoping to present and maintain. The majority of bird strikes that people hear about, that get reported, that you hear about, are often spoken of from urban areas. You hear about the strikes at large buildings downtown and on university campuses, but really the majority of bird window collisions occur year-round at residential and low-rise buildings. And when we talk about the fact that most people, if everyone just even has one bird strike at their house a year, and you take every house in America, that is how you get to the number of a billion birds being killed at window strikes. People sometimes can know that a bird hit their window because there will be stains on their window, impact markers, but 25 to 50% of all window collisions don't leave any evidence. The birds fall to the ground. They're often grabbed by predators, or they're so small they fall into leaf litter. And this leads people to think that there might not even be any window kills at their home, or in some cases that it's just a few, but not realizing that really it does add up to an estimate that there could be up to a billion bird collisions a year with glass in the United States. That equals, that equals 100 million bird collisions equals 333 Exxon Valdez oil spills. Just to put it in perspective, it's really even hard to understand the sheer volume of birds that are being harmed by glass throughout throughout our homes, as well as the well recorded downtown areas. So glass is lethal to birds. Glass kills, but there is something that you can do about it. Again, the brochure or flyer that Julie will share with you, called Making Your Window Safer for Birds, was put out by Audubon, Pennsylvania. It's a nice beginning guide. You can also go to our webpage, which shows different options, different products that you might want to use to make glass safer in your home, and things that you can do. I'll go over a few things now. Certainly turning out your lights at night is going to decrease that attraction factor. So any parts of this building where the shades are drawn or the lights are turned off are going to have a positive impact on darkening our environment, which ultimately a darker world is better for birds and for humans. So less light is better in the evening hours. You can keep blinds down, but during the daytime, you need to be cautious, because blinds that are put down during the daytime can actually enhance reflections on the outside. In the evenings, it certainly stops the light from going out. And if you have blinds during the day that have a horizontal pattern like that, you can give birds something to see that might break up the reflection or the transparency, and then cause them to avoid the window. But if you totally block your windows during the daytime, you almost put a background pattern that makes the outside surface of the glass turn more mirror-like, which can make it more hazardous for birds. There's several ways to approach stopping birds from hitting windows. Physical barriers are one area. You can literally just have netting hanging in front of a window. You can do external screens. I redid my windows recently, and I now have my glass on the inside and I have my screens on the outside. This essentially just puts a barrier. So if the bird goes toward the glass, that bird is going to either land on or bounce off of the external screening that's standing between the bird and the window. You can hang simple things like wind socks or banners in front of a window area. I had a kitchen window that was so reflective, I had a cardinal chasing its reflection and constantly hitting against the window. When I hung up wind socks in front of that window, the bird noticed the fluttering ribbons. You could even just put ribbons up. They noticed that, and they stopped looking beyond that, and they stopped seeing the reflection that was confusing to them. This is the Levy Center, which has sunscreens that sit in front of a building that is very glassy. It has an awful lot of opportunities for birds to hit glass, but having these sunscreens sitting in front of the windows gives the birds, it still allows all the light to come through the windows and gives a view out the window, but it gives the birds something in front of the glass surface that they could land on or avoid. A great product that's out there that you can either make it yourself or you can buy it from the company that produces it. It's called Acopian BirdSavers. And essentially what it is 1/8 inch paracord that is hung 4 inches apart, which is the distance that is found to be an opening that it would be too small for a bird to want to go between. And so by hanging these cords every 4 inches from the top of your window to the bottom, you can present something on the outside of the glass that birds see as openings too small to fit through. You can have them hang and blow in the breeze. You can anchor them from top to bottom and have them look a little bit more set up like a harp almost across the front of your window. And it really doesn't disrupt your ability to look in and out of the window. And at a certain point, people that put these things on their homes find that they don't even notice them anymore. So it doesn't prevent you from enjoying looking out your windows. It can be good for a doorway because it can hang and move back and forth if you're opening a sliding glass door. The website for Acopian BirdSavers even shows you how to make these cords yourself, or you can, once again, purchase them from the company. You can use decals, but you have to use a lot of them. You have to have decals in a density that doesn't leave an open space for a bird to fly through. There's a rule that's called the 2x4 rule. I kind of prefer the 2x2 rule because with the 2x4, you're like, is it too horizontal or is it too vertical? If you go with 2x2, then it doesn't matter. In every direction, you should never have an opening of glass space that's bigger than 2 inches square. And they say that the 2-inch rule will also prevent hummingbirds from trying to squeeze through. Birds know what their body size is, and they know that their wings, your typical little bird's got about a 4-inch wingspan and is about 2 inches tall. So they will try to sneak through any opening of glass that's bigger than that. So if you just put a single hawk decal in the middle of a giant piece of glass, you have left a lot of open glass, a lot of space that a bird thinks it can fit through. And people want an easy answer, and I've seen a lot of large buildings that pop, one hawk decal in the middle of a gigantic expanse of glass. The birds will avoid that area where that hawk decal is, and they will hit the glass on every other side. So if you're going to go to the route of decals, you have to have a high density of decals, and that's fine for a small garage window. It's not going to work on the side of the Willis Tower. We cannot cover the entire Willis Tower with decals. It's too much. It's too messy. So you can also, as another do-it-yourself, you can improvise and do very pretty painted patterns. They can be temporary. You can put them up during spring and fall migration and take them down afterwards. You can put anything that, again, fills the space with decorative paint so that there are no wide open areas of clear glass. This can be an art project for students. It can be something you do as a community project, and it can look very attractive. It can be temporary, or if you like it enough, you could leave it up year-round. Window films are a solution, and that was what we saw at Northwestern. It was used. You can take a window film that very cleanly covers the entire surface of the glass and very often allows you to look out the window, but provides enough patterning on that outside surface that birds look at it as an impenetrable area that they would not fly towards or through. One product that's out there is called Kaleidoscape. It is a perforated vinyl that is the kind of thing you see on the side of a bus when you can't look into the bus, but people from the inside of the bus can look out. It's just thousands and thousands of tiny holes that allow it to look like a solid surface that a bird would fly away from, just like they would fly away from a wall, but that allow you as a person who wants to look out your window to still look out. And it actually adds some shading benefits and energy cooling costs if you have something like this on your windows, because it reduces the energy flow that comes into your home, especially in warmer temperatures. This is the feather-friendly dot pattern film. You can do it you can buy it in a roll and put those rows of dots up with tape. You can buy it you can have it installed in entire sheets. These tiny dots are spaced in that 2x4 pattern, such that the bird sees something and that interrupts their ability to be able to fly through an area. And again, they're very unobtrusive. Another thing to consider as a homeowner is where you put your bird feeders. Putting them near windows will save lives, because if you have the feeder right next to the window, birds that come up to the feeder, if they get startled or try to fly away, they're only going to have a small amount of momentum, and they're only going to hit the glass as a kind of a glancing blow, as opposed to flying full tilt at the glass. They're up against the glass, and they're only going to bump it as opposed to strike it at full force. So the recommendation is that bird feeders should be placed right up against the glass if possible. Birds are important. Everyone here today has talked how we appreciate them. We enjoy looking at them. They need protection. Vast numbers of them are declining precipitously because of a variety of causes: habitat loss, climate change, collisions, cat attacks, and we we want to protect them because we enjoy them, because they're important parts of the balance of nature for distributing seeds, for, controlling insects, pollinating plants. And the vast majority of birds are in a position of losing ground, and anything you can do in your home or your workplace to make it safer is a benefit to keeping these birds that we appreciate and enjoy around. You can go to our webpage to read more about how you can help our volunteer efforts. We always need volunteers to help us with our monitoring. There are pages that'll show you how to make your home or office safer if you need someone to consult and talk to you about ways to make an area, a problem area, safe. You can contact us for that, or educational programs. Thank you for supporting us and joining our efforts at your home and office. And that's our work for protecting migratory and resident birds.
Thanks, Annette. That was really informative. I don't know about anyone else, but I was taking lots of notes. So I'm going to turn things over now to Allison Sloan. And Annette, if you can turn off your video and mute. And Allison will be talking about things you can do to encourage birds by habitat and things you can do in your backyard. So thanks, Allison. I'm going to step aside.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Sloan. I'm with Natural Habitat Evanston, and I'm going to continue where Annette left off. She gave a great summary about why it's important to protect birds and what are some of the really important steps we can do to make our home habitats safer for birds. Bob and Annette both mentioned a really important study that came out last year that raised the alarm bells worldwide by finding that a decline of 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970 in the United States, which amounts to a 29% decline of our bird population overall. So that raised the alarm and really explains why this is important to create safer home habitats for our bird populations. As Annette mentioned, there are lots of benefits to birds besides, bringing us great joy in watching them and feeding them. And there's kind of a Hippocratic oath, with creating a bird-friendly habitat, which is that first we try to do no harm, which it's very easy to accidentally create hazardous conditions for birds, but also easy to change a lot of the factors that can jeopardize birds. The first important step is to keep any cats inside the house. Cats are not a native animal. They were brought over from Europe, and they kill an estimated 2 billion birds every year in the United States. They're the largest contributor to bird declines, along with habitat destruction. The second really large factor is preventing window collisions, which Annette just elaborated wonderfully. A third important step is to not use any pesticides and lawn chemicals. If you poison your insects, you're going to also poison the birds that eat them. And then fourth is to make sure non-essential lighting is turned off outside your home and your space and your office. And that doesn't mean that your space has to feel unsafe on the outside. All that can mean is installing a motion sensor for your porch light, or a cover that directs the lighting downward instead of up into the sky, and to turn off any non-essential lights such as landscaping lights that can attract birds to your area. So the goal of creating bird-friendly habitats is really to try to return ecological value to our lawns. Our grass lawns are societally ingrained, but they are unfortunately mostly ecological dead zones. This is a landscaping concept that was imported from from Europe and was displayed early on by wealthy European estate holders. And the species that we plant as turf grasses are not originally from the United States. Even Kentucky bluegrass is an Asian turfgrass species. They're mostly from Europe and Asia. And we use them to displace the native plants that unfortunately are what all of our insects and birds rely on for food. And turfgrass doesn't produce any seeds or nectar or pollen that can be used by wildlife and birds. And it's often treated with toxic chemicals. And we're up to about 63,000 square miles of non-native turf grass that are planted in the United States right now. It's our biggest farm crop past corn. Just to give you an idea of what we've lost here in Illinois, this is the James Woodworth Prairie Preserve in Glenview, Illinois, and we're on this 5-acre patch of unplowed prairie. There are over 270 different species of plants that are still growing. There's only less than 1/100% left of unplowed prairie in Illinois. So our solution is to try to recreate these original habitats in our own spaces, no matter how small. Here's a great example from right here in Chicago. This is Pam Carlson's yard. She has 1/10 of an acre for her whole lot. It's beside the Kennedy Expressway and O'Hare Airport in a really busy, trafficky area. She's planted 60 species of native plants and shrubs and a hawthorn tree, and her backyard bird count is up to 106 different species, including an American woodcock, which is a pretty rare sighting. So where to begin? There are a lot of easy steps to take. One great thing that you might have seen around Evanston is these certified wildlife habitat signs that a lot of different homeowners display in their yards. This provides kind of 4 basic criteria for where to get started. And so I'll kind of briefly go over those. The criteria are food, water, cover, and places to raise the young, and that you must manage your yard sustainably. And so I'll go over what that means exactly. And last year, Evanston became the first city in Illinois to achieve National Wildlife Federation Community Wildlife Habitat Certification.
Allison, it's Julie. Just a sec. Did you mean to be sharing your screen?
Yes.
Okay, we can't see it, so, okay.
Okay, wait, let me work on that. Sorry.
Okay. You look beautiful though.
Oh, this is terrible.
No worries.
What happened?
So click on the green button, share your screen at the bottom and in the center. Okay. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I did click that from the beginning, but I don't know. Okay, slide. Let me see if that works. Okay, is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, here's what these signs look like. I'm sorry about that. I do want to rewind just for a second to show you. That's the Prairie Preserve. This is Pam Carlson's yard that she has beautifully restored with native plants and a pond. Here's what these wildlife habitat signs look like that you may have seen around Evanston. So that's been an effort of Natural Habitat Evanston for the past 4 or 5 years. We've been trying to encourage people to adopt these steps in their yard and to get certified and display their signs to neighbors. And so last year we finally reached that 200 home mark, which gave us the community wildlife status. So we were the first community in Illinois. We were very, very excited about that. And we had the mayor there for a ceremony, and representatives from National Wildlife Federation came out. So these 4 criterion, I'm going to circle back to food because that's the most important thing and is a much longer discussion. Water, this one's really easy. You can just put a bird bath in your yard and you'll get a lot of customers. It needs to be no more than 3 inches deep to let small birds have a chance to get in there. It needs to be stationed near shrubs or small trees so that birds have a place to retreat if there's a hawk or a cat nearby. Try to freshen the water every 2 or 3 days so you don't get mosquitoes and so the bird droppings don't accumulate in there. Or when it's really hot outside and the birds are using it a lot, it even helps to change the water every day. In the winter, this can become a lifesaver for birds when everything else is iced over. You can get electric heating coils to put in there that'll keep it from freezing over. If you get a bubbler or a fountain, that'll attract birds with the sound of trickling water. So the bird bath is the easier thing. A more involved project, but that's also really rewarding, is to dig your own backyard pond. And you can put a liner and a pump. I got minnows from the pet store for mine, and that keeps all the mosquito larvae out. And it's really fun to see the birds come down there and get a drink of water and splash around. The next National Wildlife criteria is providing shelter in places to raise the young. And I can tell you, if you build it, they will come. It is so exciting to watch these changes come to your backyard after you take some of these steps. So the easiest bird shelter to install, of course, is a bird house. There is a company in Chicago, Irva, that manufactures bird houses and feeders right here. And bird houses are also very easy to build, and they're at most hardware stores. You can take additional steps by just leaving your yard alone a little bit more than we usually do. People tend to tidy up quite a bit, and birds like things a little bit messy because that attracts more insects for them to eat and makes them feel more sheltered. So if you leave brush piles under your bushes or in a corner of your yard where they're out of sight to you, that can become habitat and shelter for them. If you leave your leaf litter in the fall under your bushes and in your flower beds and around your tree trunks, that provides them protective camouflage in the winter and when they're flying back in their spring migration. I get a lot of bird activity in my leaf litter because they know that that's where the insects are hiding and spending the winter. And so they are attracted to the food source there and the free meal in the leaves. If you can leave dead trees and logs whenever it's safe to do so, that is also a big seed source and possible nest cavity source for birds. If you can leave your flower beds as thickets of plant stems and seed heads, that's another big winter attractant and food source and shelter. If you plant more native shrubs, you will fill in the layers and create thickets that make them feel safer in your yard and protect them from predators such as hawks and cats. And also planting more native oaks and large canopy trees that they can nest in. Evergreens for winter cover are also really beneficial. Some of my favorites are the native jack pine, arborvitae, white pine and hemlock. And I also like to put out used Christmas trees around the edges of my yard, and they do get frequented by birds quite a bit. Food, so the easiest step and way to provide food as a criteria is, of course, to put up bird feeders. It's an easy and fun way to watch and help birds. This is the most helpful step to take in the winter when all of their other food sources are no longer present, specifically all the insects. There's cedar feeders that you can find easily, the erva feeders that I mentioned. Black oil sunflower seeds are a popular choice for birds for a lot of different species. There are, of course, specialist feeders for goldfinches that are for thistle and small seeds. You could put out suet in the winter to attract woodpeckers and chickadees. And don't forget that some birds don't like going to feeders and will, but still need to eat. If you throw sunflower seeds on the ground in winter, you will still be feeding juncos and native sparrows. But I encourage you to look at the websites for that. There's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology All About Birds site that has lots of great bird feeding tips. But the most important thing that that is such a big lesson, I think, to all of us that's really interesting to me and sort of new is that putting out seeds for birds is really one step that's easy, but what they need even more than seeds are actually the right insects. And that to have the right insects, they need native plants, and they need for us to leave those native plants that are maybe coming up as weeds in our yard, or they need us to plant a lot more native plants than we typically do, because a lot of nursery plants and box store plants are not native at all. They're usually ornamentals from Europe or Asia. So to feed birds year round, we must feed them insects, and to feed our native insects, we have to provide the native plants that they evolved for millions of years to eat. We tend to think of birds as eating seeds and berries, but many of them are actually insectivores mostly. 96% of terrestrial birds need insects to feed their young. And like the monarch, we know that the monarch caterpillars can only eat milkweed, but actually most butterfly and moth caterpillars are host plant specialists, which means that they only possess the enzymes to digest certain species of plants that they share a long millions of years evolutionary history with. And that applies to over 90% of insects that eat plants can only eat and develop on a few certain plants. So when we pull out those plants as weeds and replace them with nursery plants, we are destroying their food and their life support system for their caterpillars and eggs. So everyone's might have heard the term insect apocalypse by now. Unfortunately, like the bird populations, insect populations are also going down precipitously, and that's raising alarm bells among scientists around the world. I know that a lot of insects we consider to be pests, and we've devoted a lot of human history trying to beat back the insect pests, but insects are the base of the food web, and the vast majority of insect species are actually beneficial insects that pollinate plants. Over 80% of plants rely on insect pollination. They eat insect pests. They recycle nutrients. They build our soil health. The big news last year, the first global scientific review found that the total insect mass has sharply declined worldwide in just a few decades and is dropping by 2.5% per year. Now this is really bad news if you're a lot of things, but especially if you're a bird, because most birds feed their chicks insects, and most of those rely primarily on caterpillars because they're soft and because they have the highest levels of carotenoids, which are essential nutrients for birds to develop. And it's because caterpillars are eating leaves constantly, and carotenoids are only available in plants, even though all animals, including humans, must have carotenoids for nutrition and development. So caterpillars are the most important nestling diet for 16 different bird families. including chickadees, vireos, sparrows, cuckoos, bush tits, cardinals, warblers, woodpeckers, mimids, thrushes, orioles, crows, and how many caterpillars each one needs. It is a lot. One chickadee study conducted by a graduate student of entomologist Doug Tallamy, who I'll talk about in a second, actually counted, took videos and counted, and 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars are needed just to raise one clutch of 4 chickadees. And another of his graduate students tried to determine how many non-native plants chickadees would be able to tolerate in an environment. And for them to be able to find that many caterpillars to raise a nest successfully, they need an environment that's at least 70% native plants. So that means that, you know, we can all still have some of our daffodils and lilacs and forsythia, but we also need a lot of native plants put in there to counterbalance that and give them what they need. Here is Doug Tallamy's new book. His basic premise is that we have to restore nature by planting for these caterpillars. And the main focus of his is to plant keystone plants in your yard. Those are the plants that have been found to support the highest numbers of caterpillar and moth, caterpillars from moth and butterfly species. Oaks are by far the highest supporter of caterpillar life. They support over 500 different kinds of caterpillars, followed by cherries, willows. So if you have space for an oak in your yard, that is a huge ecological benefit. There's other things that we've already talked about, turning off night lights, and we'll talk about landscaping to leave the caterpillars in the topsoil in a minute. Here are the keystone plants. This is all in a handout from Julie that she can share if anyone is interested. But you see that oaks are way up there. In our region, they support 456 kinds. And further east, it's over 500. Native cherries, willows, birches. For the non-woody plants, goldenrods are the best. The great news is you probably have some of these keystone natives growing in your yard as weeds. And so it's a really good idea to look at your plants and try to redefine weeds from an insect's perspective. If it's native, try to let it stay as a food source in at least one area of your yard. Now this is a terrible picture, but this is a red admiral butterfly in my yard coming to a little weedy plant called Pennsylvania pellitory that comes up in my beds and is one of its host plants. So many weedy plants, goldenrods, asters, violets are natives, and many of the invasive exotic plants that have no value, which in my book are the real weeds, are still sold for landscaping. And then down there I have some apps that you can use to look up which plant, all the plants in your yards with a photograph. And so you can decide which ones are native and which ones you want to leave. And this is what some of the native plants in my yard look like. And this to me is a sign that these plants are highly needed. These are violets and a chokecherry. And all over my yard, they get eaten to shreds. Planting natives that furnish berries and fruits are important in the winter. Here's, again, this is on a handout. I know I'm running out of time. Hackberries, cherries, chokecherries, dogwoods, hawthorns, crabapples, mulberries, cedars, serviceberries, elderberries, viburnums, currants, gooseberries. There's lots of great berry sources, and the bonus is that a lot of them are edible for humans too. Seeds and nuts are important in the winter, not just from feeders, but let's see, there's planting an oak is of course one of the best things to do. Other great seed sources are wildflowers and grasses, prairie dropseed, little blue stem, leaving those over the winter, all of those seed heads, so that they can feed birds. Again, check the handout. Nectar, we all know that we can put out hummingbird feeders, boil 1 cup water, 1/4 cup sugar for 5 minutes, cool, and pour it into your feeder, and change it every 3 days in hot weather. But you can also plant the nectar plants that hummingbirds need in your yard. This is a photo from Tamima's yard, actually, of a hummingbird visiting scarlet cardinal flower. So at Natural Habitat Evanston, we've recently created another certification that's kind of a step, another step, a level into the bird-friendly habitat and pollinator-friendly habitat idea. And so there's the link for that if you're interested. We're really proud of our new yard signs, and those are starting to pop up around town too. Premises of this, leave the leaves in the fall, leave plant stalks and seed heads, no pesticides or lawn chemicals, plant native plants, mow less, and reduce light pollution. And we're telling you more native plants, but for everything else, the great thing is we're actually urging you to do less, you know, less blowing, less mowing, less spraying, less raking, less cleaning, less lighting, less weeding, less pruning. The first step, leave the leaves. What we mean is to simply rake your leaves into your flower beds or around trees and shrubs, or pile them into a corner to compost and use for mulch later. And the reason is that most insects, only the monarchs and a few other species are the lucky ones that get to fly south for the winter. Most of them just drop where in place and overwinter under the leaves and in the top layer of soil. So when we hire a landscaper to leaf blow our yard, we're actually blasting up all of the overwintering insects and firefly larvae and a lot of native bees, things like that, that are spending the winter under those leaves. And let's see, German government has asked their citizens to stop using leaf blowers to save insects. The leaf blower provides camouflage, and it's also nature's perfect mulch and fertilizer. The trees drop their leaves so that they can use those vitamins over the winter to rebuild their soil. So that's a really easy one if you can do it right. The next step is to leave plant stalks and seed heads. Native bees overwinter in those hollow plant stems. You can leave them in place until the insects have emerged in mid-May, or carefully remove them and prop them against a fence. And seed heads are important food in the winter. No chemicals and pesticides. An important thing to know here is that a lot of nursery plants are treated with neonicotinoid insecticides that can make the leaves and the pollen and the nectar toxic. There's more about that at the American Bird Conservancy. Native plants for year-round forage. We talked about that. A few plants, let's see, I'm just gonna try to skip through here. There are neonicotinoid-free plants available from some of these nurseries online, but this will all be in the resources. Mow less. This is a great example. A brand new no-mow meadow has now appeared at Lovelace Park. These are probably not native grasses. These are probably just turf grasses, but just from letting it grow up, the singing insects have come back. Red-winged blackbirds are in there. Insects are flying through and frequenting the area. So even just letting parts of your yard grow with what's there can show, it can support a lot of wildlife coming back to your space. And reduce light pollution because it saves moths and provides safer passageway for birds, migrating, healthier sleep and reproduction for the resident birds. Let's see. And then there are a lot of different ways to get involved with the birding community. You can become a bird rescue volunteer. You can go to the work days to restore bird habitat at the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary, Land Arboretum, Harbert Park. There's an email there for that that's in the resources. There are a lot of ways to report your bird sightings. That's really important. A lot of bird studies rely on citizen science and data reporting. And then you can get involved. It's a great local community of bird watchers here. Evanston North Shore Bird Club is here, is over 100 years old. Chicago Audubon Great Lakes. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Allison. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and share your video if you like, or you can put a question in chat and we'll try to answer any questions. And I will be sending out the resources that many of the people mentioned. So if you didn't register for the class or the program, and if you want to make sure that you get those resources, you can email me at jrand@cityofevanston.org. So I see about, we have some people chatting about the importance of oaks and caterpillars. I know I learned a lot about that, and I've been taking lots of notes about how to encourage caterpillars. I'm gonna dig up less of my goldenrod. So does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers this evening? We covered a lot, so you probably are, all bird experts now. Okay, well, if there are no questions, thank you all so much for taking part in our evening talking about how we can help and protect birds. And like I said, I'll be sending you some information via email. And if you don't receive it, please email me again. It's jrand@cityofevanston.org. So thank you so much, Allison and Annette and Bob and Tamima. We'll be ending the Zoom, we'll be ending the chat and the video. And thanks again for coming, and please support insects and birds in our native environment. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.